welcome back. I know that you want to move on quickly and get to more analysis of symbols and more trading functions, but if we don't get some of the basics right first, then it will cause problems later. And the code that I have so far has a fairly big restriction. If we look at the previous code here, which I've got on screen, the macross.py has this import config1 as config, which is great, and in config1.py I have the various settings for the trading robot to run. That's great for loading up this information, but if I want to then change any of the configuration information, I have to either edit this config1.py or edit the main code to change this and have multiple configuration files. The other problem, of course, is that if I want to run the same robot on two symbols, I would have to run the same thing twice, have two scripts running, one for each symbol, loading up different configurations. So that's inconvenient, and what I want to do today is change this so that I can have a single configuration file that will run multiple symbols. But more than that, if I were to run, say, euro and pound, that might be fine to run them with all the rest of these values the same. But if I ran gold, then I probably want a very different stop loss and take profit. And if I ran yen, I would want a different stop loss and take profit again. So I'm going to set this up so that I can have a configuration where I can have multiple symbols and I can have multiple sets of configurations all in one setting. Now, ideally, this would also be something you would put on the command line when you start the robot, but I'm not going to worry about that today. I'm still going to have a fixed configuration file, and we can look at that setting of the configuration file in the command line next time, where I'm also going to look at how you can change the configuration while the robot's running without having to stop and restart. So for today, I've already created a new folder, multi-symbol. Just close these. And in multi-symbol, I've simply copied the earlier code. So the multisymbol.py is just a copy of the macross.py. I'm going to create a folder underneath here where I will put the configuration information. And inside that folder, I'm going to put the configuration file. And you'll notice this is a JSON file. Now I've already I've already built a config JSON, so I'm just going to copy that in here. So I have groups, and groups is an array. Inside each group then I have tuples for name of the group, symbols, which is also an array of the symbols that I want to process for that group, and then of course the magic number and the other settings are all here. So you can see that in group 2 I have a different stop loss and take profit to group 1, because in group 2 I have $yen, and in group 3 I have gold, and gold of course has very different stop loss and take profit again. So I want to modify my code firstly to load this config.json file, and secondly to be able to loop through all of the groups, and inside those groups to loop through each of the symbols that I have for that group. To make this a little easier to follow, I've compressed all of the functions that I'm not going to be touching today. I don't need this import config because I'm using now the JSON file, but I do need some more imports to process that JSON file. So I need to import JSON so that I can actually understand the format of the JSON file. I need OS so that I can read the file that contains the configuration information, and to convert all of that to an object, and this will make sense a little later, I'm importing simple namespace from types. I also said that I would like to add a command line where you can specify the name of the configuration file, but I haven't got that yet, so I'm going to put in a constant here with the name of that configuration file. As part of this, I'm going to be loading all of that configuration, so I'm going to create a global variable for the configuration. And then in init, I need to load in that configuration data. So I declare this global first because I'm actually modifying config here, and if I don't have that, then I use config within the code here. I'll be assigning to a new local variable within the function. So then I have my config equals load config. This load config function that I'm going to write now will take care of reading the config JSON, converting that to an object, and verifying that all of these symbols are correct. So this piece of code here, where we tested the symbol, that's going to go into the load config. So now I can just remove this piece of code because, like I said, all the checking is happening in this load config, and let's go through the load config. First, I'm just building up a file path, and I'm assuming at the moment that my file is relative to the file where I'm running the script, because I've got my configuration folder underneath the same, or as a subfolder of the multi-symbol folder. Try, so I'm opening the config file path for read only, and then I'm using JSON.load to read in that file into config data. So that's now JSON data. I've got two possible exceptions I'm handling here: file not found, and in that case return none, or the file is not a valid JSON file with the decode error, and I also return none. But now I said I also want to handle this as an object instead of just an array. So I've got this config object that I'm creating with a call to a function called dict2obj. It's another function that I have to write, but you'll see that in a moment. It's quite small, and I just pass in that raw config data, and it converts it to an object type. Okay, so just accept now that I have this config obj, and it is an object format of the values in this config JSON file. I'm setting up this available groups as an empty array, and then I'm stepping through each group in the config obj.groups. So I've converted it to an object. Now I can use that. So for each group in the list of groups, I'm just printing out the group name so you can see what's happening. And then I'm also creating this available symbols as an empty array. And then I'm stepping through all the symbols in the group. So I'm attempting to do this select. That was the test that I had earlier. And if that is successful, then I just print a message to say I was able to select that symbol, and I add the symbol into that available groups or available symbols array. And this is how I'm managing removing the invalid symbols from the group. And if that fails, then I just print an error message for the symbol. So this if not available symbols means if I haven't added anything. So if this is still an empty array, then it means that all the symbols have failed. So I print an error message. Else, I reassign the symbols in the group with the available symbols. So I'm just overwriting the group symbols with that array of available symbols. And I'm adding that group then to the available groups, which means I'm not going to add that group into this available groups array if all of the symbols are invalid. So then I get this if not available groups, print all groups failed and return none. So a simple loop within a loop, and then I reassign that available groups to the config obj groups. And then just for diagnostics, I'm going through a loop here where I'm printing each group in config obj groups. I'm printing group name, and then I just return that config obj, which brings me back up to here, and I have config equals load config for the config file, and config is this global variable, which I have to define with the global here because I'm assigning it, but through the rest of the code, I'm just going to be reading from config, so I don't need to worry about that global in the rest of the code. But the thing that's still missing from this is the dict to obj. So I'll just write that function here. Alright, so let's see if we can unpack this. I'm passing in the original raw data. If that raw data is a dictionary, which it will be at the beginning, then I'm returning simple namespace. This is this generic object type creation. The double asterisk is to unpack the values in the dictionary. Key dict to obj value for key comma value. So I'm looping through all of the items in that data, and I'm assigning key and value. But in value, I'm making a recursive call back to dict to obj, so that if I have arrays within arrays within arrays in this configuration file, then it will call the dict to obj for each of those and create them into objects within objects within objects. Here, if is instance data comma list, so I'm saying if this particular data, and remember I'm being recursive, so I might hit a list within the recursion. If it's a list, then I have a different method. I'm still calling dict to obj for that item, but I'm performing it for every item in data. So data is a list. I'm going to go through that list and return an array. So I've got the square brackets here of dict to item for each of the items in that list. And if I get to this point, else, I think I need a colon there, then return data. I don't want a colon there. So that will recursively step through the data in this config JSON and convert all of these to objects within objects. So now by this point, I've config equals load config. I have all my configuration data. I can just close up these two to make it easier to read. And then I get to the loop. Now, in the loop previously, I was using this config.symbol that was coming from the config.py, and I was basically handling a single symbol. What I want to do now is loop through all of the groups and all of the symbols in the group. So to begin with, I've taken the process loop and I've just put in this loop within a loop, so I'm stepping through all the groups in config, and then I'm stepping through all the symbols in, it should be group, then I'm stepping through all the symbols in the group, and I'm calling process loop for symbol, passing the symbol and the group. And then I've taken most of the code and I've just inserted another function name in here, because the rest of the code is going to be in that process loop for symbol, where I handle a single symbol and data from that group. I'm just going to add a diagnostic statement here. And now the one trade at a time, I'm going to leave that for now. We'll get to it at some later date, but I change that to symbol. And group.magic there. I'm going to have to change all of these config dot values to the new syntax, so I'll just do all of that and come back. So now I've changed all of those to group dot and whatever the name of the value is in the config JSON. So you can see here I have slow MA period, fast MA period, MA time frame, price, volume, so on. So I've changed all of those, and that should be everything that I need to change in here. So I've created a simple loop here in process loop, where I'm stepping through all of the groups, each symbol in the group, and then I'm simply attempting to test that one symbol given the parameters inside the group. Now I do need to make one more change to the code, and it's a fairly untidy change. Here in get request, I had this order filling FOK. That works sometimes, it doesn't work other times. It really depends on the symbol and the method of the trade that we're performing. So I'm going to change this to add another function that will set this type filling based on the information that I have from that group. So first I'll just remove that, because there's no point in setting a default value. So I'm about to write a new function called set filling mode that will take the data in here, because this has everything I need to determine the filling mode. We'll then add the filling mode to the end of this and return a true or false, and then return request here will be this request with the filling mode added. I'm going to take a fairly blunt approach to this now and simply search for a filling mode. There are only three. Yes. I'm going to search for a filling mode that works and then just return that. So all I'm doing is using the MT5 order underscore check, passing the request in, and that will fail if I've got an invalid filling mode, and if it's successful then it will just simply return at this point with that filling mode, because this is inside the for statement. It could fail for other reasons, but even if it does fail for some other reason, I'll be returning a false then, which will mean that I return none here and effectively don't make the trade. There are calls you can make based on the symbol to get the available filling mode, but it's also affected by the type of trade you're performing, and I found that for the sake of simplicity it's quicker to just do this for now rather than worry about performing all the actual tests. We can get to that later. So that should test the filling mode and set it correctly, and I need to do that now because I have multiple possible symbols, so I can't just hard code a filling mode in there. I think that should be everything. Let me just run this. So I have in my configuration, get rid of that. In the configuration I have group 1 with euro and pound, group 2 with yen, and group 3 with gold. I may not wait for this to perform a trade today like I have done in the past. Let me just make the gold 1 minute as well. Oh, and the other thing that I haven't mentioned, you can see here I have MA time frame and I've simply set a 5. I don't have access to the MT5 enumerators inside this JSON file, so I'm simply setting the value there. There is a method that I can make those enumerators available, but I'm not going to cover that today either. All right, let's run it and see if it actually starts up. I have an error. I've got 2 commas here. Try again. Right. So MT5 initialized. I'm checking group 1. Both of the symbols there are available. Checking group 2. That's available. Checking group 3, that's available. And so I've got all 3 groups remaining. And then it's running through the process for each symbol in each group. I'm just going to create some errors in the config JSON so that you can see what happens there. So I'll change this symbol, for example, to something invalid. And we can see there failed to select symbol XAU USDX. And now I only have 2 groups because that was the only symbol in that group. Let me make another small change. Here I have a group with 2 symbols. I'm just going to make one of those invalid. And then this group should still work with just 1 symbol. Now we can see Euro USD is valid, GBP USDX is invalid, but I still have group 1 because there is still 1 symbol there. And let me do the final test. I'll make everything fail. So all symbols failed, and then I get the message all groups failed. Oh, and look, I've got an error here. It's because I'm not testing config here. So I should say, so if not config, return false. Let me clean that up and try again. And that's fine. All groups failed, and then the script just terminated. So that's it for today. I hope it's been useful to you. Like I said, we're setting up some of the beginning basics for this. We will move on to some more interesting stuff soon. Next time though, I do want to add in the ability to change that configuration file while the script is running without having to stop and restart the script. And probably also introduce the command line argument. And then we can actually get on to looking at more analytics, more than just the simple moving average. Hope it's been useful to you. If it has, then click the like button because that helps my channel a lot. And if you want to see more of this content, click subscribe and then click the bell icon to be notified when I release new videos. Thank you for watching.